Hello and welcome to The View from the Inside with your host, Kevin Richardson. Kevin, good to be with you again. How are you, my friend?
I'm doing great. As always, fired up to do the podcast. I found a great quote that I had in my desk, and it's Jessamine West. She was a writer, and she said, talent is helpful in writing, but guts are absolutely essential. And I was laughing. I thought, we could also apply that to podcasting. I don't think that was around when Jessamine was a writer, but we could say the same for podcasting. This has been a lot of fun, and for everybody that has listened to the first two pods, fired up to have you on board for podcast number 3.
I love that quote, and I agree with you. Doing this takes a lot of guts. There are a lot of people I talk to all the time who are like, "Boy, I'd really like to start a podcast." And I'm like, "Well, why don't you do it?" And radio silence.
Exactly. Exactly.
Well, look, in the last two podcasts, we learned a little bit about your origin story. We learned what it's like to be a client of Tactical Wealth Management. So, on today's podcast, why don't we dig a little deeper and find out who you deal with at Tactical Wealth Management?
Yeah, that is one of the best questions ever. And it's always interesting to hear who other advisors deal with along the way. And for us, I think if you were thinking about your traditional marketing pipeline, what are
Mm.
our 3 pipelines? There's first off the mass affluent, and that's somebody with $500,000 to $5 million. And inside there's actually 2 types when we break down the mass affluent. The second pipeline is the high net worth individual. That's 5 million and above for us, and they have some special needs along the way, but it's a super interesting segment. And then our third is fee for a plan. Someone comes in and they want to pay an hourly fee because they'd like to have some financial planning,
Mm-hmm.
some advice maybe on their estate, that kind of thing, and they're able to get involved as a client from that standpoint. And then when you kind of put a wrapper over the 3 pipelines, I think you also have to talk about pre and post retirement. That's such a big deal as a financial advisor because you're given that advice to ultimately get to retirement.
Yeah.
For us, our book is probably 60-40. 60% of our clients are pre-retirement, 40% are post-retirement. And you obviously have different needs. One is an accumulation phase and another one is in a distribution phase. At the same time, a lot of these habits that we have are the same, like calling people back and making sure you're doing the reviews. And so it's one and the same, but again, dealing with both pre and post retirees.
Yeah, that's interesting. I want to take a deeper dive though and talk about that first group that caught my ear,
Yeah.
the mass affluent, as you referred to them. You said there are 2 types of clients and 2 types in one category. I don't understand.
Yeah, that is something that obviously needs to be explained. We realized a few years ago when dealing with this client group
Right.
that we definitely had 2 types of people walking in the door. The first type I'll focus on is I'll say that's the person that's never had a financial advisor. They've maybe never had a CPA and have never dealt with an attorney or maybe just briefly, and that put them in a place where they come approach us. And that's maybe a person that was a saver. They just had money in the bank for decades,
Mm.
and now all of a sudden they feel like they need advice. That could also be a job changer. That's guy that's been at a job or a woman that's been at a job for 25 years. You've got this massive 401k and you're trying to figure out, I've heard about rollovers. What is that? And we'll probably do a podcast down the road on what a rollover is and why you should or shouldn't do one along the way. Or maybe you inherited money. Maybe your parents have passed away,
Mm.
you're in your 50s, all of a sudden I've got $1 million and I have to figure out what to do with it. Now, that's an interesting entry point if we focus on that one. and say, okay, this person has never had an advisor. Now all of a sudden they have this liquidity event, and maybe it also happened via a situation where the estate planning maybe wasn't perfect, right?
Hmm. Yeah.
Maybe you had to spend a lot of time getting these assets rounded up after, your parents passed away. So when we get that client in, it's distinctly different than the mass affluent who has dealt with an advisor. I mentioned in podcast number one, my dad was a teacher and coach. My brother was a teacher and a coach. I've coached a little bit. Man, we got to start coaching right away. You've got to explain fees, the 1% to manage the assets, because remember, these people are coming from zero. So any fee sounds like a lot.
Lot. Yeah.
And you've got to explain that value proposition. And when you think of somebody that inherited some money, well, were things held in a living trust? Oh gosh, they weren't. So there's your first opportunity to educate and coach this client on the value of a financial advisor. The other thing we're doing is we're probably opening up our Rolodex. I always say Rolodex. I wonder how many people understand that besides you and I,
A
Bill,
what?
right?
What
Showing
is
our
that?
age. So we'll jump into sales for us, if you will, and do an introduction to a CPA, because now that you've got this money, taxes are going to be a little tougher for you, or an estate planning attorney, or one of the avenues to do some estate planning like trust and will, where LPL has a relationship. So that first segment, if you will, of the high net, or of the mass affluent rather, we've got to get in, we've got to really coach. And we have found a lot of those relationships, once you get past the pricing and the understanding of what advice costs,
Mm.
and why a lot of times you might put yourself in a much better situation by hiring a professional. We get some really great clients out of that process. The second part of that mass affluent is the client that has an advisor already. And those are people that maybe we're prospecting. We've met these
Mm.
people and we know that they have a relationship. We feel like we have some things that might improve the process for them. And when you sit down with those clients, as everybody knows, I was a athlete in college. I love to compete. Well, this relationship, you're sitting down and you're saying, "Hey, let's compete. Let's show you what we do, what our process is like, and let's compare that to what you have." And we've always felt like when we're out prospecting these type of clients, we want to be really upfront. If we can add value, then man, we want you to become a client, because it's going to put you in a better place, and it's going to be good for you and going to be good for us.
Mm.
If what you have is working, but maybe the market didn't work the way you wanted it to, and that's why you're looking, lots of times we'll tell people, hey, you're probably better off staying put with the relationship you have. But two very different parts of that mass affluent market, and two very different attitudes when those prospects walk in the door to try to become clients.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Okay. But well, tell me about the high net worth client. I mean, I would think that those would be the ones that need some extra special attention, or am I wrong?
Well, you're right and you're wrong. I would say in our book of business, our high net worth clients are some of the best people we deal with. And I would actually
Mm.
say that about our entire book. Having done this 20 plus years, we're very thoughtful about who we bring on board. And one of the things I always have in the back of my mind is this a person that I like? I want to work with people I like, and
Yeah.
good people. And we've got a lot of good people on the books, and on our high net worth segment, they are fantastic people. And it's fun to get in there, and it's maybe not special, but maybe because they've got more ways to diversify and more things to think about, it makes it a little more challenging. So think very simple, like investment vehicles. a high net worth individual, they're paying a lot in taxes.
Yeah.
Well, if you can present to them if they're a California resident, a California municipal bond that's double tax free, both state and federal taxes, you're giving them a solution that is something that they really appreciate. And if
Mhm.
we can step in there and explain the difference between a general obligation bond issued by the state of California or a revenue bond or a local school bond, and talk about the liquidity and the value, and are the bonds, aka money, good, and the rating, and why we do or don't care about that, and how those cash flows work. That's a really fun conversation. And I mentioned I learned the bond business way back in my years at Merrill Lynch from
Yep.
a guy named Bill Ballinger. And that's been so valuable when you sit down with those high net worth clients. The other thing with the high net worth segment is the advanced planning. And we talked about tax planning in podcast number 2, and when we look at the estate tax exemption, that's 13.6 this year. I believe it stays the same next year, but next year it does sunset. A
Yep.
fancy word for Congress has to reset the estate tax exemption. When I got in the business, it was $1 million. I believe it will probably come down quite a bit because we have such a deficit, and the government needs to figure out how to get that revenue. And if you do some advanced planning, in the old days, we used to do an irrevocable life insurance trust, which was you'd go to an attorney, you'd get an irrevocable life insurance trust built. We would then sell permanent insurance into that trust. When the client passed away, that would then pay a portion of the tax liability via the estate taxes. That's going to be back in play here next year. I'm almost certain of that. But more importantly, that advanced planning, you really need to sit down with those high net worth clients and understand where everything is and how it's titled. And you'd be surprised, they make the same mistakes as the mass affluent. Oh gosh, I have this vacation house. It's not titled inside my trust. Okay, we're going to want to follow through and make sure you guys get that done. So it's a different set of problems. It's a little less about, do I have enough to retire? And it's more about, am I making sure that the estate plan is in place? Am I doing things tax efficiently? And they've got that ability to be, if you can say, ultra diversified, get into some asset classes that maybe the mass affluent isn't able to
Mm.
partake in.
Yeah. A while back, you mentioned a fee for planning group. Uh, Tell me how they fit in with things that you do at Tactical Wealth.
Super good question. As I've mentioned, that financial planning piece has been a real evolution for me since I got my certified financial planner designation back in 2005. From the real simple, just putting together a balance sheet and looking at what's going on. Now it's evolved into a financial plan via the fintech of Right Capital that we
Yeah.
use. But we find a lot of people in the community sometimes will approach and say, gosh, I'd love to get some advice, but I've been at the same job for 20 years. Almost all of my liquid net worth is inside my 401k. And unless I separate from service, I understand that I have no assets to bring over.
All right.
But I'd love some advice on, am I on track for retirement? Am I doing the right things via my estate plan? And what we'll do there is we'll go with an hourly fee, bring them in,
Hmm.
do a plan, and get a look at things. So it's a great way to get a client up to speed, and maybe someday down the road they have that liquidity event. Maybe it comes as a job change or inheritance or whatever,
All right.
but we will set that up and they're able to get the planning in place and understand maybe the weaknesses in their financial plan and hopefully adjust. The other piece that fills in there a little bit
Mhm.
with our mass affluent clients and our high net worth clients, well, they have the audacity to also have kids. And when
Oh,
they have kids that become young adults and get that first job, we'll always recommend, hey, have them give us a call if they want help figuring out how their 401k works. So they'll come in, we'll explain to them on a real high level, right?
Right.
What happens when you put money into a 401k versus just taking it as pay, what the tax advantages are there.
Hmm.
And then we'll also run illustrations via Right Capital. And it's that old thing about, do you save a little bit of money every year for 40 years, or do you save a whole lot in the last 10? And anybody that's done a time value of money calculation, I'll have them download a 10B2 app on their iPhone sometimes and teach them how to do that calculation. And it's so powerful, the time value of money, especially over 40 years. And
Yeah.
when you show somebody that, hey, if you max out your 401k, if this is the only thing you do in your financial life, if you max it out for 40 years, the numbers are astounding. So
Right.
that's another way we use that fee per hour service to service our existing client base and help these young adults get some good financial habits in their pocket and give them the ability to move on. And we've actually had a few of those, because of course I've done this for a few years. We've actually had a few of those kids become young adults with really, substantial wealth and come back to us to be their financial advisors. So it's always been a fun conversation. Number one, it's fun to hear what the young people are doing, and it's also been really good for our business.
But Warren Buffett has a great quote about the power of compounding interest. Yeah. and, and when you look at the numbers, you're like, holy smoke. Wow. That is right. I look, this may be maybe, I can't help but ask this question, okay? We did not talk about what your clients do for a living. Are you like most advisors where you work with people that they all tend to be in the same line of work, or do they have different occupations?
That's an easy answer. No. It's interesting to dive into that and talk about it, because when we started in the biz, it's in rural Monterey County. There's not a single employer that has thousands of employees.
Yeah.
And so we dealt with everybody. And I remember going to training, and in training, they would tell you, gosh, go to Google and have all your clients be Google employees. And then you'll know their retirement plan and blah, blah, blah. And of course, just logistically impossible down here in rural Monterey County. But more importantly, the further I got into the biz,
Yeah.
the more I realized that would never work for me, because it's just so boring, right? You're talking to clients that all work at the same place, that all have the same concerns, the same complaints, etc. Right? And so our book of business is like my friend base. It is diverse. And I so love that. I think I mentioned in an earlier podcast about how us advisors, we kind of get the blinders on and we think the access of the world goes right through our office. And
Hmm.
I love talking to people that are from different lines of work, because it gives me a much better ability to triangulate and figure out what's going on in the economy. So, Salinas Valley and the Central Valley, that's ag. And we've got salespeople that we deal with. We've got farmers that we deal with. We've got ranchers that we deal with. And that's just a really fun group that just gets in and works hard. Now, you transition out of the Silicon Valley or the Salinas Valley and the Central Valley, you head to the Silicon Valley. And of course, that's tech. And we've got sales executives. We've got operations executives. We've dealt with stock options over the years and seen how those are both good and bad for people along the way. Real estate professionals, interesting. We always see kind of an ebb and flow with real estate and professionals, and you can almost kind of read the real estate market accordingly. If it's good, they've usually got their money all the way in real estate. If things are starting to slow, they'll start to look to diversify a little bit. Um, the other thing that is pretty incredible is people that work in the trades, a carpenter, an electrician, a plumber. I don't know if you guys have ever or have done a home fix-up project. If the listener's done a home fix-up project over the last 5 to 10 years, you understand what that costs and the kind
Mhm.
of money those people are making. And they're starting to jump in and say, gosh, let me figure out a way to do a retirement plan through my company. So it's really fun how diverse our book of business is in terms of livelihood. And then the other thing that we also find as a big advantage, I always feel like I'm always trying to be a connector, but if you've got that client who's got a son or daughter that's graduating from college, and they'll mention, yeah, they don't really know what they want to do. We'll always say, hey, have them give us a call. Come on in and we'll talk about financial services and then also just figure out what they want to do. And boy, 9 times out of 10, I've got somebody that's in the line of work that they're interested in, and I'll make this introduction, and it's totally fun, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Um, because you're taking this, this client's kid that is so important to them. The client is important to us, and you're making this introduction. The other thing that goes hand in hand with this is location. I think about that same training when I first got into the business and we're up in the Silicon Valley and this huge producer is giving us a talk and we're all trainees in this thing called Paths of Achievement. And I'm
Mhm,
so excited to
mhm.
hear what this guy has to say. And one of the first things he says was, find a company and just deal with everybody from that company. I'm like, okay, well, that doesn't sound like a lot of fun. The second thing he said was, if you don't see your clients face to face once a quarter, they will no longer be a client in 2 years. I'll guarantee it. And if I think of how our book of business has expanded post COVID, pre COVID, I'm not sure I had ever done a Zoom call as a financial advisor. I'd been on some Zoom calls, but none as a financial advisor. I'm pretty
Right,
sure of that. Soon as COVID happened, we jumped onto Zoom and mostly with our older clients as more of a check-in when COVID
yeah.
was had us all locked down. And yeah, you'd get some upside down video from an older client trying to figure out the iPad. But Zoom has opened things up for us. We have a client that's overseas. We have a couple clients in Hawaii. It doesn't matter where you're at now. It used to be, it felt like your prospecting had to be in the neighborhood.
Right.
And now it is really worldwide to really sound dramatic here. But with Zoom, it has become such an easier way to connect with clients. And it's been a positive as a guy who loves variety around his clients. I love to hear what the weather's like in different parts of the country. And we sit out here in Monterey County, it's always 68 with a breeze, and we complain when it gets foggy. So that's been a huge plus for financial services to be able to get onto Zoom and connect with clients. And I think in the most important way, our older clients that lack a little bit of mobility, we're able to fold that in, if you will, and make that a part of their day and connect them by the Zoom call, much like we're talking today. But super fun, and again, a lot different than the
Sure.
super producer that I heard speak almost 20 years ago. And by the way, I know that guy went on to have a spectacular career and I think is still in production. So I wouldn't question anything he has to say, except for, yeah, I've taken a little different path and it's worked out great for us.
Well, that's good to know. That's good to know. A little diversity in paths to success are as important as diversity in your friend base and the people you talk to. This has been a great rundown of who you work with at Tactical Wealth Management. So I think we pretty much covered all the bases. We've got your origin story. We've talked about what it's like to be a client of yours and who you deal with. So here's my question. Where does the View from the Inside podcast go from here? What's next, Kev?
Oh my goodness, right? We got the work out of the way. Podcast 1, 2, and 3.
Yeah.
We our goal was to maybe fuse sports, current events, and finance,
Huh.
which are interesting subjects. How do you make those all come together? But I am super pumped about our first guest that we're going to have on board. He's a former Stanford football player, much younger than I. He played in the Orange Bowl in 2011 with Stanford. They were ranked, I think, number 4 in the country that year. And
Mm.
that's pretty crazy when you think about what's going on in college football and the college
Oh,
football
yeah.
playoffs. That a number 4 ranked Stanford team, you're in the Final Four at that point. So he had a great career as a football player at Stanford. And the best part about this guy, like a lot of the people I meet through that Stanford pipeline, that football thing was just a thing. That's, I don't think, the best thing this guy is doing. He's a sales leader at LinkedIn, and that's kind of cool. But the bigger deal is he's an expert on LinkedIn. Now, there's 200 million users in the US that
Mm.
use LinkedIn. And for you and I, Bill, we kind of go, well, gosh, I remember the day I'd print up 20 resumes, right? And it was remember, you'd get the real fancy paper, go down and
Oh,
spend
yeah.
the big bucks, and you'd hand it to somebody, they'd write on it and throw it away as soon as you walked out the door. But LinkedIn is the way things are going, right? That is the resume. And there's just different segments, much like our customer base. You've got the 20-year-old that's trying to paint this picture of, hey, this is what I did in college. And this guy has done some really great work with student athletes using LinkedIn to paint this picture, build a brand, if you will, why you're employable, explaining that those 40 hours a week you were putting into your sport really translate into being a good employee. Uh, I'm sure for the older folks like us, can point out the weaknesses in our profile, the things that we need to be thinking about, and job changers. How do you use LinkedIn as that tool? So I'm totally excited to talk to this guy. He's a high achieving guy that has a lot of life lessons, and he's super active on social media. That's really kind of fun to watch. And of course, he's a football guy. So how do you not like football guys? So that's where we're going, and we hope to fill the pipeline with many more guys like this. But I look forward to bringing everybody that podcast number 4 of the View from the Inside.
That's great. It also hit a sweet spot for me because the only social platform really I'm very much active on anymore is LinkedIn. So I'm really looking forward to that. And listening to you talk just now, I remember like having these conversations with myself about what weight of paper stock do I buy? You know?
Yeah, 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 yeah. And you would go down. I remember we would go down to the library because they had a printer that you could use, and it was a
Yeah.
good printer that always had enough toner. So, yeah, those days are gone. Yeah, the 200 million users of LinkedIn have proven this is probably a better way.
Yeah, but you know what? It's going to be interesting to listen to because I still believe, Kevin, that that electronic resumes get tossed aside just as fast as the sweet resume on the nice paper stock resume got tossed aside. So it'll be interesting to hear his insights. Looking forward to that.
Should be fun. Thank you.
Yeah, no. If people are listening to this, want to reach out to you, Kevin, and maybe have further conversation with you, what's the best way for them to get a hold of you?
Yeah, super easy. 831-717-1144. Normally we pick up the phone. If we don't, leave a message. We'll call you right back. And you can also hit us with an email, Richardson at TAC Wealth. T is in TAC, T is in Tom, tacwealth.com. Shoot us an email and we'll get you on the calendar and sit down and talk about your financial concerns.
Yeah, and for those of you who are listening, maybe driving or somewhere where you don't have a pen to write anything down, don't worry. It's in the show notes. You can check those later. The contact information is there. The other thing you can do, and that's one you could probably do like right now, is reach out and hit the follow button. So if you're not a subscriber, I would encourage you to become a subscriber, because that way, every time Kevin drops a new episode of his podcast, you're notified. You can give it a listen. The other thing that I would ask, and this is up to you, if you like this podcast, if you enjoy it, I would ask that you tell people about it, because word of mouth is the best promotion you can possibly give something that you like and that you find useful. Until next podcast, when we meet the mysterious quarterback transitioned into sales leader at LinkedIn, I'm Bill Tucker. On behalf of Kevin Richardson and everybody at Tactical Wealth, thanks for taking the time to listen today. And I would remind you that you can go out today and make today a great day, and I hope you do. But you have a choice. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening to the View from the Inside podcast with Kevin Richardson. Click the follow button to be notified when new episodes become available. To ask questions about topics covered during the show, head over to www.tacwealth.com. And don't forget to check the show notes for additional contact information. Kevin Richardson is a registered representative with and securities offered through LPL Financial, member FINRA SIPC. The opinions voiced in this podcast are for general information only and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual. To determine which strategies or investments may be suitable for you, consult the appropriate qualified professional prior to making a decision.